The Last Ticket Out of Town by Seraphine. Windhoek has three temperatures: hot, mosquito, and fucking cold. The city is allowed 2 or 3 days of mild spring weather in the early September before the unrelenting heat crowds them out until May. The summers are long and sweaty, so much so that job offers can be sweetened by the promise of air conditioning and an overseeing committee to adjudicate on room temperature disputes because white people do not know how to share. Summer nights are stifling. Cooling breezes hit their curfews and leave the night air still and warm from the day's lingering heat. The departing sun brings out the mosquitoes. They are organized, they're driven. If they could be employed, they would be the city's most reliable workforce. Alas, people do not have my vision. From sunset to sunrise, they make enjoying a quiet evening drink on a balcony a buzzing and bloody affair. June, July, and August are bitter and cold. An ill wind clears out the gyms. Running noses are the only exercise anyone gets in the winter. The city is called a city because the country needs one, but really, city is a big word for such a small place. But it would probably be offensive to have a capital town or a capital village. So someone called it a city. The title stuck. Life is not hard in Windhoek, but it is not easy either. The poor are either falling behind or falling pregnant. The rich refuse to send the elevator back down when they reach the top. And since cities require a sturdy foundation of tolerated inequalities, Windhoek is like many big places in the world. It is a haven for more, but a place of less. If you are not politically connected or from old white money, then the best thing to be is a tourist. The city and the country fawn over tourists. The country's economy does too. That is when it's not digging itself poor. That is Windhoek. The best thing to do in the city is arrive and leave.
Hi, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover. I'm Leslie Ann Murray. Today we have Rémy Ngamije, who is a Rwandan-born Namibian writer and photographer. He is the co-founder and editor of Doek, Namibia's first and only literary magazine. His stories have appeared in the Johannesburg Review of Books, Columbia Journal, and other places. He was shortlisted for the Caine Prize for African Writing in 2020. The Eternal Audience of One is his first novel. Rémy, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover.
Leslie Ann, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And can I just say, I'm so excited to be here. When you first sent me the message to be a part of this, I absolutely jumped and I told the people at Scout Press, like, we need to line this one up. Thank you so much. I have the deepest love and respect for people who create platforms to read and enjoy stories and to create community, especially in these past 2 years, because COVID has taken community away from us. And so what you're doing is an essential human service. So thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really beautiful. Thank you. Rémy, tell us about the Eternal Audience of One.
Man, it's a story that's been living in my head for the longest time since I went to university in the long ago period of 2007. And what it is, it follows a young Rwandan man, about 23, 24 years of age. He's in his final year of law school at a prestigious university in Cape Town. Over the course of this year, the book explores not only his life in migration, because he was born in Rwanda, moved to Kenya for a little bit, and then his family eventually settled in Namibia, but in reverse chronology and I guess through time jumps, it explores not only his young life or his formative years in Windhoek and abroad, but also that of his family, and then a host of, eclectic characters that he encounters along the way.
In your novel, we see young middle-class African millennials trying to find themselves and their place in society. Tell us about the importance of this search.
It is such a complicated search that I don't think many of us ever successfully complete. Here on the continent, we spend a lot of our time exposed to ideas from elsewhere. from the US, North America, from UK, from Europe, from Latin America, from all parts of the world. But rarely are we exposed to our own cultures, whether it is pop culture, music, rhythm, tradition, whatever it is. We're rarely exposed to that. Only now is the consciousness developing that we need to change that. So you grow up with the idea that good things happen elsewhere, abroad, in North America, in Europe, in Brooklyn on 157 and West, and that's where things happen, good things happen. And so you grow up with already with this pre-nurtured desire to leave. And if you have the opportunity to leave, good for you. But if you don't, then you have this idea of being stuck here. And when you grow up and you become a teenager and you're approaching your late teens, all of the freedoms and all of the things that you've seen being enjoyed elsewhere, you realize they're not around you. And in a lot of ways, you haven't been nurtured or raised in a way to adapt to current conditions and change them. So this African millennial search of individuality, of self-expression, of avoiding the patriarchy, of breaking away from traditional or conservative values, it's very, very challenging. You run smack bang into that thing as soon as you hit your late teens and your early 20s. You realize where you are isn't like all the things that you've read in books or that you've seen in movies or series or whatever. And then that search is a way to harmonize your personal expectations with the world around you. And that search, sometimes it can be very rewarding in the sense that I have reached a stage in my personal life where I have learned to fight for the freedoms that matter to me most, but I've also learned to let a lot of things go because it's not happening for me here. And so that African millennial search is a very complex thing that is different from Windhoek in Namibia. It's different in Cape Town in South Africa. Joburg, Durban is different. Malawi will have a different experience. Nigeria will have a different experience. And that is really my attempt in this novel, was to try and show how people of these demographics are really just trying to find their place in the world.
You know, when I was reading this book, I know it was going to be important in many ways, but more particularly, it's talking about being an African immigrant in Africa. And this has happened, this has been happening throughout history, but we've never seen this replicated in like a book and talked about. Can you talk about that, please?
Gosh, girl, where do I start? All of the stories that I read when I was growing up, it was always about people leaving home and then going somewhere. That somewhere else was often crossing the Atlantic to go somewhere far away. And you know, even the great adventure stories you're told is about someone leaving their town and going to a faraway land. It's never leaving your village to go to the village 10 kilometers down the road. And so that sense of travel and adventure, that's what I internalize as migration. It's only a very select group of people who fly to the UK or land up in like Manhattan. It's like such a small, but the stories don't reflect this. And so for me, there's a book that I read, a wonderful story called Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I read the story, and that became, at the time when I was reading it, it had become the quintessential immigrant story, leaving Lagos to come to the US. And a lot of African literature was following in that same path, showing how hard it is to be Black abroad, abroad being the UK, US, Germany, France, Spain, whatever you want to name it. But I couldn't find much about Nigerians moving to Ghana or Zimbabweans moving to the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are normal migrations that happen, but you don't hear about them. It was a big act of courage for me to put a story set in Windhoek, Kigali, Nairobi, and Cape Town on the page. And I struggled with it, the writing of the face, because the entire writing process was like, no one's gonna believe this, no one's gonna read this. So wouldn't these jokes be much better if it was set in New York, or if I imagined it in Camden Heath in London somewhere? And it was a big fear for me. Like, will anyone relate to the story? Will anyone enjoy the humor or the sadness or the pain and the loss? And it's like, you know, in order to be universal, does the story have to get to New York? Why can't it take place in Yaoundé or Ouagadougou or you know, wherever? But for me, because I was limited in the sense that I'd never been to these other places, I almost had no choice. And so I had to be brave about accepting that this was the story and then being true to that story as best as I could.
In an interview, you said the beauty in Namibia is fictional, but the reality is done right hard and nobody wants to talk about that. Yeah. Why not talk about it?
It's like sometimes, you know, I'm not very spiritual, but sometimes now that I'm Namibian and I've committed a big chunk of my life to living and working here, sometimes I sit and I think like, you know, maybe Namibia was just given us to test us. Like, how long can we give it to these people before they realize they can actually turn this hellhole into paradise? It's like we're sitting in, like we're waiting, I don't know, for some messianic savior, but it's not going to happen. It's going to be us. And so that's what I mean by like, it's fictional. So you cannot, and this is something that I think I need to work on. You will land in Namibia and you will tell me about the sand dunes and the ocean and the giraffes and yada, yada. And I'm like, yeah, I know. When people say Namibia is beautiful, I'm like, it's like a tourist narrative for me. And that is not strong enough to wash over the harsh reality of life in this place. But again, the opposite is like, the harsh reality is not strong enough to erode the hope and the dream of what this place could be. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this, to speak to you. It was so wonderful when you got back in touch with me way back. Wow. And I was so excited to just be here. And today was incredible, man. Thank you so much, Leslie Ann. Yeah.
Remy, I'm speechless. Sometimes, you know, the words is crowding, like,
yeah,
this has been so beautiful, so amazing. And it was like, oh, talking to a friend that I have never met.
Yeah. No, this was, it was a much needed conversation, one that I haven't had in a long time. I think it's why I was pleasantly surprised. I was excited to do this, but I was very curious because we've never spoken and interacted before. But even before we got to talking, when we we're setting up, I was just like, wow, this is the energy that I needed on a Saturday. So
thank you for this lovely conversation. I'm going to be smiling for days, honestly.
Oh, gosh.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, bruh.
Yeah.